There are moments when the way a man reacts to your boundaries reveals far more than his words ever could. If every time you express a need he labels it as drama, he is not simply disagreeing with you, he is dismissing the validity of your experience. This dismissal may be subtle, wrapped in a joke or a sigh, or it may be direct, as if your feelings are a burden he is unwilling to carry. For a woman who has already navigated decades of relationships, raising children, or building a life on her own terms, such minimization can feel like a familiar wound reopening. It is not the disagreement itself that erodes trust, but the consistent message that what matters to you is somehow an overreaction. When legitimate requests are framed as exaggerations, the unspoken narrative is that you should question your own perception. Over time, this narrative can become corrosive. It wears down your confidence in knowing what you need and in believing those needs deserve respect. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow as the hidden, often rejected parts of the self. In many men, the shadow holds an aversion to being confronted with their own shortcomings. When a woman sets a boundary, it can provoke that shadow, triggering defensiveness or derision rather than dialogue. The more uncomfortable he feels with self-reflection, the more likely he is to belittle the request instead of engaging with it. This dynamic is rarely loud at the start. It may begin with a shrug when you voice discomfort or a playful remark meant to make you seem overly sensitive. These are not harmless quirks. They are signals. They tell you he is sidestepping accountability. Rather than consider whether his behavior crossed a line, he redefines the conversation so the problem lies in your tone, your timing, or your tendency to overthink. In doing so, he keeps the focus off his actions and on your supposed flaws. You may notice patterns. Your feelings are met with impatience, your concerns are met with jokes, and your attempts to address recurring issues are brushed aside as melodrama. In each of these moments, he is shaping the emotional climate of the relationship. He is making it clear that only certain parts of you, those that do not challenge him, are welcome. Over weeks or months, you may find yourself editing your words before speaking, weighing whether the discomfort you feel is worth the fight. This self-censorship is not peacekeeping. It is the gradual silencing of your own voice. From a Jungian perspective, a man who reacts this way is not engaging with you as a whole person. He is interacting with a projection, a version of you that exists in his mind, one that is easier to manage because it demands less from him. Your boundaries disrupt that projection. They remind him that intimacy is not about comfort alone. It is about growth, which often requires facing what one would rather avoid. In his eyes, this disruption can feel like an attack, when in truth it is an invitation to mutual respect. Recognizing these signs early is essential. It is not about picking fights or proving points. It is about seeing clearly that a partner's unwillingness to meet you in your truth will shape the entire relationship. The minimization of needs is not a neutral act. It is a choice that communicates where you stand in his priorities. And when you know what is being communicated, you can decide whether that is a message you are willing to keep receiving. Notice what happens the moment you say no with clarity. If his warmth turns to weather, if messages slow without explanation, if humor becomes a blade rather than a bridge, you are not watching a mystery of the heart. You are watching a strategy. Sudden distance after you set a limit is not reflective space. It is a quiet penalty designed to make you doubt whether your boundary was reasonable in the first place. One day he is attentive and leaning in. The next he is vague, late, or unreachable. This is not randomness. It is a pattern of reinforcement that teaches you, without a single lecture, that closeness is conditional on your compliance. The alternation between attention and rejection is especially destabilizing because it mimics intimacy while eroding trust. The brain remembers the high of his engaged presence and works hard to earn it back, sometimes by abandoning the very limit you set to feel safe. You begin to rehearse conversations in your head, edit your needs into smaller sentences, and convince yourself that asking for basic respect was a misstep. In reality, it was not the request that created the distance, it was his inability or unwillingness to meet the relationship with adult responsibility. A man who values connection uses discomfort to grow capacity. A man who fears accountability uses discomfort to control proximity. In Jungian terms, a boundary calls forth the shadow, the disowned parts that resent being seen. When your limit points to a behavior that needs maturity, his shadow may defend itself through withdrawal, sulking, sarcasm, or selective amnesia. Projection often follows. The quality he refuses to face in himself is assigned to you. Ask for consistency, and you will be labeled controlling. Ask for respect in public spaces, and you will be accused of being too sensitive. Ask for clarity about future plans, and the narrative becomes that you are rushing things. The issue is no longer the content of your boundary. It is your audacity to have one. Spot this pattern by tracking 3 simple signals. First, intensity. How sharply does his tone, affection, or availability shift after you speak up? Second, consistency. Does this shift repeat whenever a boundary reappears, regardless of topic? Third, recovery time. Does closeness resume only when you drop the subject or apologize for your tone, not when the concern is addressed? When intensity spikes, consistency repeats, and recovery depends on your silence, you are not resolving conflict. You are being trained to disappear. Protect your center without turning the relationship into a courtroom. Name the behavior internally before you engage so you do not argue with your own perception. Frame the meaning accurately so you are not baited into side debates about tone or timing. If you choose to address it, anchor the request in values rather than accusations. Instead of relitigating every example, you might say, "I want a relationship where care increases when something is hard, not decreases." If he is capable of growth, he will move towards you with curiosity. If he is committed to avoidance, he will move away and call it peace. The first response tells you there is a future. The second tells you there is a cost. Give yourself a brief observation window before you self-correct. 48 hours is often enough to see whether the coldness is a reaction or a rhythm. In that window, maintain your ordinary warmth without overfunctioning. Do not chase the connection with explanations, fixes, or gifts. Connection that requires you to sacrifice self-respect will not sustain you. Real closeness survives honest edges. It might wobble, but it does not punish. If you notice the pendulum swing only stops when you soften your boundary, pause and ask the question that returns you to truth. What must I betray in myself to keep this going? If the answer is your sleep, your schedule, your dignity, or your voice, then the price is too high. It is not coldness to refuse that price. It is selection. The right partner will not call your clarity drama. He will recognize it as the invitation it is, a doorway into a connection that can weather storms without resorting to silence as a weapon. If this brought clarity, share your experience and stay with the conversation, because the moment you honor your limits is the moment respect begins to take root. Some men have a way of turning the tables so smoothly that you barely notice the shift until you are defending yourself for something you didn't cause. This is the subtle art of role reversal, where he distorts the facts of a disagreement until he emerges as the one wronged, and you are left wearing the blame. In the moment, this can be deeply disorienting. You enter the conversation seeking resolution and leave questioning your own memory. This dynamic is a form of projection. Jung described projection as the act of casting one's own denied qualities onto another person. Here, responsibility for his actions is transferred to you, not because you caused the harm, but because accepting fault would threaten his self-image. The shadow, in Jungian psychology, is often protective of pride and allergic to humility. Instead of facing an uncomfortable truth, it deflects it. And in this deflection, You become the receptacle for frustrations that were never yours to hold. Over time, repeated exposure to this inversion can alter the way you see yourself. You may begin to doubt your instincts, replay conversations, and search for the exact moment you went wrong. In reality, what's wrong is not your perception, but the environment that keeps distorting it. This erosion of self-trust is dangerous because it makes you more susceptible to manipulation. The more you second-guess your own clarity, the easier it becomes for someone else to rewrite your story. The signs of this reversal are often embedded in language. Listen for sentences that start with "you always," or, if you hadn't, when the situation at hand was triggered by his choices. Pay attention to when your valid concerns are reframed as personal attacks, or when your attempts to set boundaries are recast as selfishness. These rhetorical shifts are not random, they are strategic. They redirect the emotional current away from him and toward you, until you are the one on the defensive. Breaking free from this pattern requires reclaiming the narrative. This doesn't mean engaging in endless fact-checking, which can devolve into a battle of versions. Instead, anchor yourself in what you know to be true about the moment. State your perspective plainly and resist the pull to over-explain or over-apologize. This is not about winning an argument, it's about refusing to lose yourself in it. Clarity is your greatest tool here. Clarity in your values, your memory of events, and your right to hold both without them being reshaped to fit someone else's comfort. When you feel the conversation slipping into inversion, pause and ask yourself, is this about the issue I raised or about protecting his image? That simple question can reorient your mind and keep you from accepting blame that isn't yours. Restoring balance in a relationship where blame shifting has become a habit takes more than sharp observation. It takes boundaries that do not yield under pressure. If he cannot meet you in accountability, then the connection is built on uneven ground. And in uneven ground, no amount of self-sacrifice will make the structure stable. A healthy partnership requires the courage to own one's actions and the humility to see where change is needed. If those elements are absent, no amount of role switching will disguise the truth. Respect cannot survive in the absence of responsibility. There is a particular kind of persuasion that does not look like force at all. It arrives dressed as tenderness, cloaked in declarations of care, and framed as a testament to love. Yet beneath the softness lies an insistence that you should relax your limits for the sake of the relationship. The words sound reasonable at first, "I just want us to be closer," or "if you trusted me, you wouldn't need that boundary." This is not an overt demand. It is an emotional nudge meant to convince you that bending your own rules is a sign of commitment. When this pressure appears, it is rarely about the boundary itself. In many cases, the limit you've set is simply a mirror, reflecting where the other person's desires collide with your principles. Jung might call this a meeting point between your conscious self and the other's unconscious impulses. The request to soften your stance is not a neutral negotiation, it is a subtle reshaping of your identity to fit a mold that is easier for him to inhabit. Over time, these small concessions accumulate, and the space that was once yours alone becomes a shared territory where your needs carry less weight. The danger lies in the framing. The idea that love should have no walls can sound romantic, but in practice, healthy love depends on clearly marked thresholds. Boundaries are not barriers to intimacy, they are the structure that allows intimacy to be safe. Without them, affection can drift into entitlement and connection can become a one-sided performance. This is especially true when giving in is treated as proof of devotion, while holding your ground is painted as coldness or mistrust. Pay attention to the language that accompanies these requests. Phrases like "don't be so rigid" or "you're making this more complicated than it needs to be" aim to reframe your discernment as a flaw. What's really being tested is not the flexibility of your rules, but the firmness of your self-respect. The moment you begin to equate love with self-abandonment, you start carrying the weight of the relationship alone. From a psychological perspective, repeated concessions in the face of this pressure can erode not just respect, but attraction. Paradoxically, the very firmness that may have drawn him to you can become the quality he works to weaken. And once that strength is gone, the dynamic shifts. You are no longer an equal partner with a defined presence, but a malleable figure who adapts to his comfort. Jung would suggest that this loss of self is a step away from individuation, the process by which you become fully yourself in relation to the world. To protect against this erosion, it helps to identify your non-negotiables, the limits that, if crossed, would alter your sense of safety or integrity. Knowing these in advance keeps you from making decisions in the heat of persuasion when the pull to maintain harmony feels strongest. When you sense the conversation leaning toward compromise for his benefit alone, pause and return to those anchors. Holding to a boundary does not require hostility, it requires clarity. You can acknowledge his feelings while remaining unmoved in your decision. You can express affection without surrendering the very framework that allows that affection to thrive. A healthy partner will see your limits not as obstacles, but as invitations to meet you at your full height. The wrong one will see them as challenges to overcome, mistaking your care for compliance. Love that is worthy of you will never ask for the cost of your essence. If a request for closeness demands that you abandon the very lines that define who you are, then it is not closeness, it is control in a softer voice. The integrity of your boundaries is the measure of your relationship's respect. And respect, once compromised, is far harder to rebuild than it is to protect. Some conversations are not really conversations at all. They are battlegrounds disguised as dialogue. You enter wanting to address a specific discomfort, but instead of exploring the issue, the discussion veers into a critique of who you are. This is the moment when disagreement stops being about behavior and starts being about your character. He may accuse you of being too sensitive, too controlling, too negative, shifting the focus away from the concern you raised and placing you in the position of defending your very identity. This is more than a deflection tactic. It is a way of making resolution impossible because the topic has shifted from something actionable to something personal and immovable. When you are busy protecting yourself from character attacks, the original problem dissolves into the background, unresolved. Over time, this pattern conditions you to avoid raising concerns at all, just to protect yourself from the sting of being mischaracterized. The result is silence, not because there is peace, but because there is no safe space for truth. A man who cannot engage with discomfort without attacking will often believe he is just being honest or telling it like it is. But what he is revealing is an emotional immaturity, a resistance to accountability disguised as candor. Jung might say that this is the shadow defending its territory. To acknowledge your perspective would require him to confront parts of himself he prefers to leave unseen. By making the conversation about your supposed flaws, he avoids that confrontation entirely. In healthy relationships, difficult conversations are approached with curiosity and a willingness to share responsibility. One partner might say, "I didn't realize that bothered you, let's talk about it." Or, "I can see how that came across, I'll be more mindful." In unhealthy ones, the tone shifts to competition. The goal becomes to win rather than to understand. This mindset is toxic because intimacy cannot survive in an environment where vulnerability is treated as weakness to be exploited. When you notice this dynamic unfolding, the first step is to resist being pulled into the competition. You are not there to win points. You are there to protect the integrity of the connection. That means refusing to engage in personal counterattacks, which only deepen the cycle. Instead, you can name what is happening. "We've moved away from the issue I brought up. I'd like to come back to it." This recenters the conversation on the matter at hand without escalating the conflict. Resources for handling these interactions extend beyond the relationship itself. Trusted friends, mentors, or therapists can offer perspective when you feel disoriented by repeated personal attacks. Writing down what was said and how you felt afterward can also help you see patterns that are harder to spot in the moment. The act of documenting reinforces your sense of reality, which can weaken under the weight of repeated distortion. Ultimately, the ability to discuss discomfort without resorting to personal attacks is a sign of respect, not just for you, but for the relationship as a whole. If that respect is absent, you face a choice. Continue shrinking yourself to avoid conflict, or hold your ground and risk losing the connection. Neither path is easy, but one preserves your self-respect while the other erodes it. The truth is, love cannot thrive where dignity is under siege. The man who values you will meet your boundaries with dialogue, not with war. He will understand that your discomfort is not an indictment of his worth, but an invitation to grow together. And if he cannot meet you there, then his role in your life may not be as a partner, but as a teacher, the one who showed you through his resistance how essential it is to keep your voice, your clarity, and your boundaries intact.